we know that people who fit in enjoy their work. They enjoy the experience of being in an organization. They're emotionally rewarded by it. And we all aspire, I imagine, to create organizations where members of the organization wake up in the morning and want to come, and where they feel attached and indebted to the organization, and mostly indebted to their peers, and by creating a healthy cultural environment, we can facilitate that. It's the experience of coming to an entirely different cultural context that makes visible to you how pervasive culture is, but also how invisible it is. So, like an example I always like to use is when I came to the States for the first time and people would say to me, let's have coffee sometime. And I would take that as a literal invitation to having coffee sometime, and I didn't quite understand that it was in fact like a very nice, pleasant way to finish a conversation, but where the intention is, actually I don't want to have coffee with you, but let's just pretend that we had a nice interaction. And so I would initially respond by saying, oh yeah, sure, let's have coffee sometime. When? It took me a while to figure out that that wasn't the intention of the speaker. And it's only when you're kind of transposed to very different cultural settings that suddenly your lack of cultural skill becomes apparent to you. And that moment, to me, kind of highlighted how important but invisible it is, and why it's important for us to study it. Culture is about the systematic distribution of beliefs and cognitive understandings across a population. And it's very difficult to measure people's cognition. Historically, we've been doing this by asking them questions through surveys. The problem is that surveys are not very good instruments because we lie to ourselves, we lie to others. We sometimes are not very well attached to our cognition, and especially our unself-conscious cognition. That's what makes it unself-conscious. And add to that the fact that it's not very feasible to ask people questions every day, time and again. It leads to huge attrition and disengagement. The internet revolution has made a variety of behaviors that up until recently were not recorded, recordable, and they leave a trace, from how we communicate online to our purchasing behaviors. Everything now leaves a trace. And marry that with the computational capabilities that we now have, our ability, just our ability to compute on our smartphones. We now have computational capabilities that are akin to what NASA had in 1985, that with new machine learning tools, artificial intelligence, deep learning, the ability to analyze unstructured, complex data and to reduce it to measurable outcomes. Both of these together bring us to the golden age of cultural analysis. So we were very lucky to have collaborated with a few organizations already that were willing to share information deriving from the email exchange amongst their employees over a period of multiple years. By now, myself, my colleagues, and all the members of our lab, we've analyzed many years of data being exchanged by members of multiple organizations. And there's a lot of information culturally that we can derive by looking at how people use language in their emails. The reason that language is such a useful way for us to analyze culture is because language is probably the most important medium through which cultural information is exchanged between individuals. I'm not interested in whether, when you and I are talking we talking about How are we going to address this particular customer problem? Or are we going to talk about HR issues? Or are we going to talk about the Christmas party that's coming up? What functionally we're exchanging is immaterial to the analysis. What's interesting is whether in discussing these topics, we're using the same kind of linguistic styles as a reflection of our cultural alignment. So whether we're using like aggressive and brief language, or whether we're very apologetic, and you can just think about all your email exchanges. There's a significant difference between saying, "Dear so-and-so, it was such a pleasure to meet you, and I hope that this is not an intrusion on your time, etc. But if you don't mind, at your earliest convenience, can we please meet?" And you can say the exact same thing, but say, "Hey, John, can we meet next week?" without all of the introductions and apologies. Functionally, you've exchanged the exact same information, but there's a lot of cultural content embedded in how you chose to present yourself and the problem and the question. And that's precisely what our analysis tries to infer. Swear words are very, from a symbolic point of view, they're very aggressive. If somebody drops an F-bomb, it's noticeable. It's not a subtle thing that people do as they speak. And if you think about the organizations that you've been in, or the various cultural contexts in which you've gone through your life, there's a lot of variation in terms of whether it's allowed or really a faux pas to use swear words in interaction. And you can imagine that there are certain organizations where not only do people swear a lot, they use swearing as a means to project to others their authority and their tenacity. And you can imagine at the other extreme that there are organizations where the use of swear words is perceived as an offensive and inappropriate way of handling yourself and would be interpreted as aggression. So it's the same use of language, but it's interpreted very differently as a function of what's normatively appropriate or inappropriate in these two different settings. In the research that I do, and where we analyze how people use language in their interactions, their habitual way of speaking inside the organization, whether they swear at the appropriate level is a very strong signal of the extent to which they're aligned or misaligned with the normative expectations of their peers. The mere information about whether or not an individual is correctly using language insofar as how language is being used by others and reflecting their expectations and beliefs about the world is a very strong indicator of whether that person reads the cultural code, and whether, conditional having read it correctly, whether that person has the motivation to behave in a culturally compliant way. So you can imagine that some people realize that it's inappropriate to swear, but they swear nevertheless. And that decision, whether conscious or unself-conscious, has a lot of information. They're either signaling to others that they don't want to be part of this group, or they might feel so secure in their position in the group that they believe that by behaving in a nonconformist way, they can signal to others their uniqueness without undermining their position in the organization. So there's a lot of information in these very subtle and automatic decisions that we make and how we communicate information to one another. Discoveries on culture are both exciting and daunting. They're exciting because we're starting to figure out the constituent components of this opaque thing that we call culture. They're daunting because we discover how complex it is, how difficult it is to manage, and how not one-size-fits-all or one-shot exercise it is. But again, they're exciting because I think we're at this moment where the research can be translated into insights and into methodologies and into tools that can inform managerial decisions in a way that would make management more effective and more rewarding to everybody involved.